I'm standing there, and some guy walks by. Mendel falls on his, around his shoulders, and he's kissing him, and the guy is like, "Excuse me." He wasn't from the taxis, and he wasn't from Russia. He says, "Excuse me, I'm from England. I'm British." So Mendel is still holding on to him, and he turns to me, standing there gawking, and he says, "No, so if he's from England, you don't have to kiss him." He felt like he had to teach me something because, a kid is standing there, an older chassid, a mashpia, amazing. The presence of mind combined with the intensity of.
So the stories of people who teach are just as important as the teachings that they are teaching. So therefore, we thought that it would be a good idea, instead of hearing directly the teachings, hearing your ideas, but for now, to hear your stories, to hear the stories of the people that inspired you to teach and say and believe and feel what you do. So therefore, I chose a gallery of pictures, of photographs, and I'm going to show you the photographs one by one. And these are people that you recognize and know or knew. And if you would be so kind as to react to the pictures and share with us what comes to mind when you see these people, and tell us maybe some stories about them, or what inspired you about them, or what about them made you what you are today, which in turn made us what we are today, and many other people as well. So that's the idea. You like the idea?
I love surprises.
Okay. Hopefully they won't be. This is a Mendel Futterfass.
Mendel Futterfass was named after his father. So his name is Menachem Mendel ben Menachem Mendel. His father died before he was named. So he was orphaned at a very young age. And he grew up to be this giant of a man. I mean, he was actually short, but he was the role model for all the other great chassidim. How you stand strong and defeat communism and atheism. Like, it's not an exaggeration. He brought communism to its knees.
With a smile.
They couldn't do anything with him. They tried everything. He outlasted them. He outsmarted them. In the labor camps, in the prisons. Amazing guy.
But you sat by Fabrengas with him? You listened to him, Fabreng?
Yeah. He would tell stories.
And what were his shining qualities, other than the fact that he brought the Soviet Union down? When he was done with the Soviet Union, what were his shining qualities after that? With Hasidim, with Bachrim, he was a bridge between the Rebbe and the Hasidim.
Well, in his last years, the Rebbe asked him to move to Kfar Chabad and to become the mashpia in the yeshiva there. And I was so jealous. Imagine hearing from him every day. Unbelievable. Anyway, so a few things I can tell you is he suffered terribly because they knew that when the previous Rebbe left Russia, was actually forced to leave Russia, the Chassidim who took over the leadership of all of Chabad for all of Russia, this Mendel was one of them. And the Soviets knew it. So they really went after him. He knew all the names, he knew where the underground yeshivas were, he knew who had built the mikveh and who had everything. And they wanted that information. They couldn't get it. So I can't imagine what kind of torture they put him through. When he came out, through the intervention of the British government, he moved, of course, to England, where his daughter had a family. His son, I think, was still a single. I think he was still in yeshiva. But after he had come to England and finally had a normal life, his daughter died in a car accident. And that year, he came to New York, of course, every year for Yontif. I walked into 770. It was late at night. Lights were off, except for the yahrzeit lights, the on the wall, the little bulbs. And I hear voices. So I go in and I see Mendel is sitting with one of his closest friends, Morozov.
Mendel Morozov?
Yes. And I really didn't want to eavesdrop on the conversation, but this is what I heard. Mendel Morozov was saying, it's really hard. It's really hard. The tragedy had broken Mendel Futafas. And his friend was saying, it's very hard, very hard. And Mendel said, yes, but if you're a mensch, you lift yourself up and continue going. That's all I heard. Kept me up all night. More than one night. But that's what he did. A short while later, he was back to himself. Look at the sparkle in his eye. Full of life. So, we happened to end up in a sukkah together one year. I was still in yeshiva, and the crowd had left. Everybody had finished eating. And I was left alone in the sukkah. I was eating late. And all of a sudden, Mendel comes in with his lunch. He sits down across from me, and we're talking, and he reaches for something on the table, and his face went pale because the movement had created some pain in his hip or in his lower back or something. And he quickly looks at me to see if I noticed. And I had turned white also. So he immediately breaks into this big smile and he says, you see, a person has to watch every move they make.
You told a story about him in a sukkah, I think, or maybe not, about somebody hitting him on his hat, trying to get his attention.
That was his partner in crime. That was Osher Sasankian.
And who reprimanded him?
He did.
Oh, so I didn't get the story totally wrong. So what was that story? Because it's one of my favorite stories ever.
Yeah, they had just come out of Russia. It was Sukkot, you're right. And word got out that they would be leading a Farbrengen. 200 people showed up. So there's a Farbrengen, and 200 people are singing, and they're inspired, and the other chassid of Usher had also been in Soviet prisons and gulags and so on, and managed to survive. But he was like almost, although they were the same age, this Reb Usher was like a student of Reb Mendel's. Wouldn't do anything without asking Mendel first. anytime you ask them to come somewhere, to go somewhere, to do something, da fragen by Mendel. So anyway, they were sitting next to each other, and somebody wanted the usher's attention, wanted to tell him something.
During this big Farbrengen.
During the singing, when everybody was singing. So he couldn't make himself heard to catch the usher's attention. So he leans across the table to kind of, slap him on the cheek and get his attention.
Farbrengen.
Usher saw the hand coming, and he instinctively pulled back. And Mendel noticed this. And Mendel turned to him very, very sharp, and he said to him, "One day in America, and all of a sudden you're afraid of a slap? Pull yourself together." Which means that in Russia, he would never have done that. When somebody reaches over to slap him, he just stands there and takes it. Otherwise, if the slap intimidates you, they've got you over a barrel and you're gonna lose. So they didn't give an inch, these people. Not an inch.
Yeah, you see, that's what I'm talking about. You said it, if I bring in, you could have the most amazing chassid, inspiring personality. But when you have these kind of people sitting and talking to you, and they're not telling their stories, I don't know, it's just incredible. He also told a story about him, about people coming to New York for Yom Tif, right? And he was the welcoming committee. That was him. Yes, I'm not messing that up.
Yeah, it's a rather longer story, but yeah, he came out in '67, and then I remember what year it was that the Soviets suddenly allowed a large group of Chassidim to leave for Israel.
Okay.
It was already, I think, in the '70s. So Reb Mendel had been to New York. Reb Mendel was already familiar with the whole scene. He was practically an American already. But then this large group of Chassidim who were allowed to go to Israel, the first Rosh Hashanah that they were free, the Rebbe paid for all of them to come to New York for Rosh Hashanah. He gave them all tickets to come for Rosh Hashanah. And that was known as the Rosh Hashanah of the Russians. The Rebbe gave them seats up front. He honored them with hakafis when Simchas Torah came around and called up to the Torah. Anyway, so when they arrived, they all came on one flight. So they're all coming from the airport, each one with a taxi or two in a taxi or with their children. Mendel is standing in front of 770, and one taxi after another pulls up. And the people in the car are the Chassidim that Mendel had not seen in many, many years. Because either he was in the labor camp or they were in the labor camps and they missed each other. Some of them he didn't even know were still alive.
Must have been an amazing time to be alive.
So I'm standing there, teenager, and I'm just overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion. You don't see that kind of emotion in the West. People are cool. They don't have that depth of heart. So every time a taxi pulled up and the door opened and Mendel saw somebody he hadn't seen, and they may have suffered together or grown up together or taken risks together, course, they embraced each other, and the emotions were so thick you could cut it with a knife. And then the next taxi would come in, and Mendel would run to the other one, and they would hug, and they would cry and laugh. It was really, really intense. The only person that I knew who had that depth of emotion, both for joy and for pain, was my mother, because she was also from Russia. Anyway, one taxi after another, and there must have been 15 of them. And Mendel is overflowing with emotion. And between taxis, he kept saying, "Now that's an airplane. An airplane that brings such guests. That's airplane." Like, that's what airplanes were created for. The existence of airplanes was now justified. So as I'm standing there, and he is going through these intense memories and reliving all sorts of stuff, you would think that he was pretty preoccupied. But he noticed me standing there and gawking at what was going on. You know, this American kid who doesn't understand what friendship is and what emotions are and what joy is and so on. How do I know he noticed me? I'm standing there and some guy walks by. Mendel falls on his, around his shoulders, and he's kissing him, and the guy is like, "Excuse me." He wasn't from the taxis, and he wasn't from Russia. He says, the guy says to Mendel, "Excuse me, I'm from England. I'm British." So Mendel is still holding on to him, and he turns to me, standing there gawking, and he says, "No, so if he's from England, you don't have to kiss him." He felt like he had to teach me something because, a kid is standing there, an older chassid, a mashpia. Amazing, the presence of mind combined with the intensity of these were people who were direct products of what they learned in Hasidus. They were living. No, they were Hasidim. They were living Hasidus. It's also awesome to think about these Hasidim we're talking about when they were growing up together. Rabbi Isaac Shvei was a young student in the yeshiva when Rabbi Mendel was one of the older students in the yeshiva.
Now that's a yeshiva.
Mendel, like most of these Chassidim, was physically very, very strong. I guess you had to be to tolerate that torture. But they were very powerful, physically powerful people. Not delicate.
Mendel was born, and Nissen texted me, Mendel was born in 1907.
So he was a few years younger than the Rebbe.
Yeah.
Somebody asked him, just very innocently, "How were you able to do that? How did you survive all that?" And Mendel's honest, sincere answer was, "If you had been there, you would have done it. The situation called for that kind of behavior, so what choice did I have?"
Well, there were a lot of people that were there that didn't do it.
I know.
It's not it's very nice to him to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure he believed it.
And that's why if the Rebbe had given him any kind of special attention, it would have hurt him. Actually, I was there when the Mendel arrived for the first visit to the Rebbe. Now, you know, he came out of Russia completely devoted to the previous Rebbe. And if you have any idea of what a devotion to a Rebbe is, it's in your genes, it's in your DNA. It's
a loyalty.
And to switch to another Rebbe is like switching to another grandfather. It's personal. It's intimate. It's your whole life. Anyway, so Mendel came to New York. He had never seen the Rebbe. And the Rebbe had spoken about him and cried when he spoke of him. So obviously, when Mendel was arriving, we all wanted to see how this first encounter between a chassid and his new Rebbe, we foolishly thought we would see something. So I was standing on a bench upstairs in 770 for Ma'ariv. And the Mendel had come in before the Rebbe, like everybody else. And then the Rebbe walks in. And I'm looking at the Mendel, and I'm looking at the Rebbe. You wouldn't know, you could not tell that anything unusual was happening. They were both containing the emotions. It was on the outside, you saw absolutely nothing, which was so impressive.
Mind you, this was a man who wrote the Rebbe a letter in his mind. Right? And the Rebbe got it and responded to his family. So,
yeah.
Amazing.
Actually, he was in a labor camp when the previous Rebbe passed away in 1950. They had constant interrogations. And the interrogations, according to Reb Mendel, were worse than the prison itself. It was mental torture, and they were good at it. They were experts. And they would play these games, and you never knew what they're going to come at you with, and you had to be on your toes, and it was always in the middle of the night when you were tired. Anyway, they called him into the office, and he was expecting a typical interrogation. This guy said to him, "Mendel, it's over. Give it up. The Rebbe passed away." His first thought was, cute, try something else. He didn't believe him. And then when Mendel told the story, he said, "You know that when you hear the truth, you know it's true. Something told me that it was true. And for the first time in all the years, my knees buckled and I had to sit down. But only for a minute. Because then I realized the sun sets and then the sun rises. There'll be another Rebbe." So I stood back up and I didn't let him get to me. Let me the perfect example for what kind of strength it took to survive those mental tortures and so on. One of the guards informed Reb Mendel, because everybody loved him, even the murderers there. He came and informed Reb Mendel that another chassid by the name of Moshe was arrested the night before, and that he was put in a cell on the floor just below Reb Mendel. and that if he spoke into the opening in the floor, in the cement floor, where the heating pipe goes, Moshe will be able to hear him. So late at night, Mendel lays down on the floor and puts his mouth next to the opening, and he says, Moshe. Now, Moshe was new. He didn't have the contacts. And Moshe says, who is this? And he says, Mendel. And then he asked him the first question. Moshe repeated it when he came to Montreal, and I was in yeshiva, and he was verbanging. He says, Mendel asked me, Du bist zufrieden? Are you content? This is what you ask somebody who was just thrown in jail by the Soviets, who was almost certain not to survive and never come home. You're asking, bist zufrieden?
What did he mean? What did he mean by asking that?
He meant
Who's
like
Moshe, by the way? Who's a Moshe?
Moshe.
Veshetsky?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What he meant was this. They're going to try to break you. That was the biggest danger. They'll beat you. Okay, they'll beat you. But they're going to try to break you. And you have to resist. Because you start giving out names and people are going to die like flies. So you have to resist. So that Mendel said to him, he wanted to know, are you equipped? Are you ready for this? And to be ready for this, you can't give an inch. You can't surrender an inch. If you're not content to be here, they're going to get to you. If you're, what is the word? In any way disturbed, in any way made uncomfortable by the fact that you're here, they've already gotten to you. Don't give an inch. You're here because you're supposed to be here, because God brought you here. It has nothing to do with them, and you're perfectly content to do what God has in store for you. And yeah, fine, I'm here. But if you're, what is the word, disquiet, then you're starting to crack already. So you see what kind of, the power of the mind. You know, sometimes you hear about these gurus or yogis. They can go into a trance and walk on burning coals or whatever that is. You know. The power of the mind. They train for that for years and years and years. And then what can they do? They can tolerate some pain. These guys tolerate some pain. That's for a child. So, like you said before, we can hardly relate to any of this. But some of those qualities are necessary not only in a crisis, you know, not only when lives are at stake, but when the meaning of life is at stake. I remember hearing from a soldier, I don't know if I read it, where this soldier had been through very difficult circumstances and had been awake for many, many hours and overtired, and the whole troop were trying to relax. And this guy said, okay, I'm going to sleep. And someone said to him, "You can sleep? You'll be able to sleep?" He says, "My body does what I tell it to do. If I tell it to sleep, it's going to sleep." This is necessary not only when you're at war. This is what a mensch is. A human being is an intelligent being, which means that everything he does begins with intelligence, even sleeping. The body doesn't dictate, your mind dictates. So your body sleeps when you tell it to sleep, and it eats when you allow it to eat. I remember as a kid thinking, the Rebbe sat at Fabrengens sometimes 7 hours. There were those famous Fabrengens that lasted 7 hours. Never in all the years, I never saw the Rebbe yawn. Why? You don't yawn in front of people. And if you tell your body not to yawn, it doesn't yawn.
Yeah. All right. It's amazing stuff.
You know why you don't yawn in front of people?
Why?
Because it makes them yawn. It's for some reason it's contagious.
And that the Rebbe didn't like. Like talking to people who were yawning.
We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.